Building a better Bay Area. Moving forward, finding solutions. This is ABC 7 News.
Good afternoon. I'm Liz Kreutz. You're watching Getting Answers live here on ABC 7. This is where we ask experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. We have a packed show today. We are talking about the return to the workplace. Getting employees back into the office is key to rebounding our economy. We have partnered with global consulting services company Sequoia to find out what exactly this is going to look like. Also, delay after delay, and now even more delays could be on the horizon for San Francisco's Central Subway project. We're going to talk to our media partner, SF Standard, to learn why. But first, big news today. The FDA has cleared the way for some Americans to receive an added layer of protection against COVID. Adults 50 and up can now receive a second booster shot. So here to talk about this and today's other top COVID headlines is UCSF infectious disease specialist Dr. Monica Gandhi. Dr. Gandhi, thanks for joining us again. When we last spoke about this last week, you had mixed feelings about this second booster. Do you think the FDA is making the right decision?
Well, I think they were right to approve it for immunocompromised. That's actually been true since May, but this is a reiteration of that. And then also they said the fourth dose should be used for older adults. And I completely agree with that. The question is, what is that lower limit at which it can be approved? And I will say that Quebec is 80, the UK is 75, Germany is 70, Sweden is 70, and only the US has gone down this low to the age of 50 as the lower bound for who needs it. The one problem with doing that is they didn't actually consult the FDA or the CDC with their advisory committees today. And the White House has already told us we only have enough fourth boosters for over 65 and above while waiting for congressional funding. So I'm really worried a 51-year-old could get it when an 80-year-old really needs it. So I think it was not the right call to not have the advisory committees come in.
That is interesting. And that was going to be my next question for you is, should everyone now over 50 go out and get their second booster?
Well, so there was a study in the New England Journal that we talked about last time, I think, that showed us about healthcare workers who were up to the age of 65 and what the fourth shot did to them. This was in Israel. Now, importantly, remember, Israel approved it for the fourth shot for over 60 and healthcare workers. So anyway, this was published last week in the journal, and it showed us that there was no benefit from those who are 50 to 65-year-old in terms of vaccine effectiveness of getting the fourth shot over the third. And there was no difference in their viral load. So even your ability to transmit to others. So we don't have the data that we need it unless we're 65.
To your point earlier, sometimes these ages just seem so arbitrary. Why 50? Why was that the number? I feel like there could also be a 45-year-old who's high risk that feels like they would benefit from it too. So why these arbitrary numbers and ages?
Yes, I think it's actually because the U.S. has not firmly settled on their COVID strategy. I really think this. I think that there is a way to think about COVID prevention, which is preventing severe disease. And then the second idea is preventing all cases. So an extreme is that UK and most of Europe is saying we care about severe disease, whereas China is saying no, COVID lockdowns, we want no cases. Those two are extremes, and the US is not sure where they want to go. So they want to prevent all cases. And that's why we recently had mask mandates up to February 24th. And maybe giving a lot of people a booster, but at some point it's not going to be sustainable to prevent cases, and severe disease is what we care about.
So let's say for people who do feel like they want to go get that fourth shot now and they're over 50 and they're eligible. Early on, people were mixing and matching vaccines. So maybe your first two shots were Moderna, then you got the Pfizer booster. Is it okay to mix and match for your boosters to get the one booster of Pfizer, one booster of Moderna?
I think it's not only okay, but it actually makes sense to me to mix them. And the reason is Pfizer covers a certain part of the spike protein. Moderna covers another part of the spike protein. They're actually not the exact same sequence. And so you're going to get more exposure along the spike protein, antigenic exposure, if you mix them. So I would mix them.
And how much time should someone wait between the third and fourth shot?
So, in traditional vaccinology, it's really 6 months. Now, what the FDA said today is 4 months. But again, traditional vaccinology, we actually like to wait 6 months between doses because you have a good priming of the immune system. So if you can wait, I would wait 6 months.
Do you think that this news today is a sign that eventually fourth boosters are going to just be open to everybody?
They could be, but there are two questions. One is Congress funding additional COVID funding, because right now, actually, it was Speaker Pelosi who took it out of the congressional budget because everything was going on with the Ukraine. And if you don't buy doses for the public, then you're going to, then certainly insurance can pay for it. But then what you're leaving out is uninsured people. So at some point, to open it up to everybody, we need that secured congressional funding. And that the White House just wrote a piece this morning in the New York Times saying, please, please, you've been giving us COVID funding just a little bit more to get us through this next time.
So to clarify then, if you are over 50, you are qualifying for this fourth shot, will it be covered by your insurance?
Right now, they are essentially saying that but it's very clear distinction. They didn't say recommend.
Right.
They said you have permission to get it if you're 50 or older. So remember how they put it today. So yes, right now you can go and get it paid for because we do have doses in the pharmacies, and I really don't think everyone 50 and above is going to go get it. I just want to make sure that those who are much older, please get there first.
I just think, to your point, the fact that it's being offered but not formally recommended is just going to add a lot of confusion for people when we've already been going through 2 years of this back and forth.
In fact, I'll tell you what I'm most worried about the decision today is that if you look at our third booster campaign, we have 40% of Americans with a third shot. That compares to 60% in Denmark and higher in the UK. With the way we roll out additional booster shots and all this confusion without advisory committees, FDA saying one thing, NIH saying one thing, the Biden administration saying another thing. This is a public health, in my opinion, mess. And it will sow distrust in the American public. So I would have preferred Germany, Sweden, UK, Canada strategy, just give a specific age cutoff, say we'll pay for it, make it older, because that's what made sense by the data, and just make it happen.
Absolutely. So before we move on to other quick topics, just let's say 6-year-old, healthy 6-year-old, not considered high risk, would you recommend that they go and get this fourth booster?
That's a great question, because between 60 and 65 is a gray zone in the sense that there was a study from Israel that showed 60-year-olds above benefited, but they didn't slice it by over 60 or over 60. If you want to go get it and being over 60, to me, that seems fine. I don't see any harm in it, but it's the 50 to 60 that I'm really, I think it's just going to make your antibodies go up and come right back down.
All right, good to know. So a lot of gray space, which I guess we've become used to in the past couple of years. But let's move on now and talk about BA2, COVID-19, spring break. A lot of people traveling right now, gathering. How concerned are you that that is going to lead to a big spike in cases?
So BA2, to give its three characteristics, is it more transmissible, virulent, or does it evade the immune system? Okay, it is more transmissible. It's about 30% more transmissible, but about 50% of our strains here in the US are now BA2, and we're not seeing major case rises actually in most areas of the country. And in fact, Boston wastewater surveillance is staying flat. So that's a good sign, because we saw a lot of BA1, so it's hard to get BA2 after BA1. They protect against each other. Is it more virulent? No, it is not. That's data from Denmark and the UK. It's not more virulent than BA1. And then does it evade the immune system? It actually speaks to what we were just talking about. You have to distinguish antibodies from cellular immunity, B and T cells. It doesn't evade cellular immunity. It's not more virulent than BA1. But both BA1 and 2, your antibodies don't work as well as your cells.
So I think I have about 30 seconds. Dr. Anthony Fauci said this week that people should be prepared for maybe some kind of COVID restrictions to return, for instance, indoor masking in places. Do you agree?
I don't, because the CDC has actually linked indoor masking to hospitalization rates. Our hospitalization rates are lower than they've been since July 2021, and we are doing great with our immunity, both vaccination and immunity, and that is keeping our hospitalization rates low. 0 deaths in Illinois today, 2 deaths all of California today from COVID. We are really beating the COVID virus for severe disease.
That's a great way to end this. All right, Dr. Monica Gandhi, thank you as always for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up next, after 2 years of the pandemic, employees are finally bringing workers back to the office. But what exactly is that going to look like? We're getting answers about the great return after the break. Hi, Facebook. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining us. Kristen Z is out this week, or for a few days this week, so I'm filling in for her. We appreciate you watching us, and we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a minute to talk about the Great Return. Welcome back. One of our key pillars to building a better Bay Area is tracking how the pandemic has changed the landscape of the workplace. As we transition toward the endemic phase, companies are finally calling employees back into the office. ABC7 has partnered with Sequoia. That's a people investment consulting firm that surveyed hundreds of companies across the U.S. to see exactly how workplaces have changed. Joining us now to talk about the key findings is the Vice President of Communications for Sequoia, Netta Conyers-Haynes. Netta, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you being here. Tell us about the overall findings from this survey. Are companies preparing to bring people back?
Hi, Liz. Yeah, thanks for having me. So we've been studying the impact of the global pandemic since 2020 through a series of employer reports and surveys that can be found on dataforest.sequoia.com. And this time around, we asked 459 employers about their plans for returning to the workplace, how they're creating a more flexible workplace, and how are they taking care of the well-being of their people. And so most of the respondents are California technology-based companies, mid-sized companies between 100 and 499 employers, and lots of great findings, particularly around when people are planning to require their employees to come back to work.
So we do actually have the results of one of those questions, which you asked the companies, when do you plan to require employees return to the office? Many, it seems like, are still undecided. 37% undecided, about 24% say this spring. Is there something that stood out to you the most about this? Are you surprised to see these numbers?
Yeah, I think it is a bit surprising that in November, only 6%, as you said they were returning in the spring, and now it's 24%. But I think what it tells us is that the world is opening back up, and so are the workplaces as well. So companies are gearing up for a return, but I think what's also interesting, there's not a lot of employees back in the workforce right now. So we might see that shift.
Right, with 24% saying they plan to return this spring, that means 75% are either undecided or not yet returning. That's a lot of the workforce, though, still not going back to the office.
Yes, and I think the Omicron variant had a big factor in why employers are undecided, right? That kind of shut down the world again. So we do know that a lot of employers said they're undecided because they don't know what to expect with variants or subvariants.
How much of the Great Resignation and the fear that employees are going to quit if they have to come back to the office in person, how much is that having an impact on these companies as they return to the office?
Yeah, I think companies are certainly paying attention to that, and that's why they're creating more flexible work arrangements, right? We've seen a huge spike in hybrid workplaces where employees, they're not required to be, or most employees aren't required to be in the office every day, maybe only a few days a week. So for sure, companies are paying attention to that and employees' needs, and they're adjusting workplace requirements.
So if you could talk, Netta, about the survey you guys did back in November. I know we had you on then versus now. What are some of the big changes we've seen in how companies are now approaching the reopening?
Well, yeah, the biggest factor is just when they are planning to require people to come back into the workplace. We're also seeing that hybrid work is here to stay. We did see a lot of employers say that they are willing to allow their people to relocate to anywhere in the US. We saw an increase in that this time around. We also saw an increase in the type of hybrid work environment. So we know hybrid was kind of forced upon us, but this time around, we're seeing more employers say that yes, employees can come in whenever they want to. We're also seeing a shift in that employers are applying to do business in new states. And so the office is here to stay, is what we're seeing. But also, given that people are moving around and reshuffling, employers are paying attention to that and they're opening offices in new areas.
What did your findings show about leasing? Because it appears that many of the companies that you surveyed said that they are keeping their leases and they have no plans to end their leases.
That is absolutely correct. We did ask that, and most of the companies said they are not reducing their office leases. And that's pretty interesting because we've seen an exodus, or at least we thought we saw an exodus in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that might be true, but the physical workplace is here to stay. But I think people will have more options in where they can go, right? We did see that employers are opening offices in new areas. So that just might give people more options on where they can work, but the physical location will be around for a while.
So given that these companies aren't necessarily saying, okay, we're going to be 100% remote, they're keeping their leases, they're keeping their physical office structure. What will the workplace look like then when people do return? Is it going to feel different than pre-pandemic in the office?
Yeah, I think so. You know, I think 6% have said they have already returned to the office. And what we're going to see is fewer people in the office at the same time, right? That's the hybrid work environment. You can pick and choose when you want to come into the office, and you don't have to be in the office every day. So everyone won't be in the office at the same time. I think that's going to be the biggest shift. Employers are also experimenting with more time off, so company paid time off to give people a little bit of break. And then what that environment looks like when you come into the workplace. I think we're going to see different work arrangements in that there'll be more communal space, right? Not so many desks close together. So that experience might be different. And I've even heard some companies think about creating the office space as more of a social environment. So when you come in, it's a time to connect with your colleagues, the people you haven't seen in person for almost 2 years.
Right. So one of the questions you asked about, which I think a lot of people are curious about, is the possibility of companies moving to a 4-week work week. What kind of response did you get to that?
Now, this is one I was really surprised. You know, we've been hearing about burnout and what ways to adapt to or to help employees reduce burnout. I think what 91% said they are not planning to adopt a 4-day work week. So, you know, we've seen that adoption or that experiment in other countries, but so far all signs show that a 5-day work week is here to stay.
Womp womp, right? Everyone wants that dream 4-day work week, but not anytime soon. Netta, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited that you were here, and we have more pieces coming up later this week as well, digging into your survey. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as I mentioned, ABC 7 News reporter Stephanie Sierra has dug into this topic, and she's going to have stories today, tomorrow, and Thursday on ABC 7 News at 4 and 6. So we hope you watch for that as well. Stick with us. We'll be right back. That did. Okay, thanks, Facebook. Stick with us. We have a good guest coming up. Francisco Standard. The standard's focus on hyper-local quality of life issues aligns with ABC7's efforts to build a better Bay Area. Today, the standard is focusing on the long-anticipated Central Subway project. For the last 10 years, the project has been delayed and gone over budget several times. And now, maybe no surprise, we're learning about even more potential setbacks. Joining us live to talk about this issue is the editor-in-chief of the San Francisco Standard, Jonathan Weber. Jonathan, thanks for joining us. This reminds me of that song, This Is the Song That Never Ends, and it goes on, my friend. This project is like the project that will never end.
Yes, indeed it is. Yeah, they've been working on it for a long time now. 2010, I think, was the original construction.
So let's start by talking about how we got here. For those who maybe haven't followed along or are newer to the Bay Area, what exactly is the Central Subway and what's the history of the project? Because as you mentioned, it first began in 2010.
Yeah, so the Central Subway connects Soma to Chinatown, essentially, going under sort of Russian Hill, Nob Hill there. And it connects the 3rd Street Muni line into that Chinatown station. Now, the origin of this project was actually a kind of a political negotiation that was related to the decision not to rebuild the Embarcadero Freeway after the Loma Prieta earthquake. And Chinatown was very concerned about the lack of accessibility in Chinatown without that freeway. And so the Central Subway was supposed to be a solution to that. And that deal was brokered between Willie Brown and the late Rose Pack, a Chinatown community leader.
So there have been many setbacks for this project over the years. Can you talk about some of those setbacks?
Yeah, well, these projects are always very difficult when you get into drilling deep tunnels. You know, there's all kinds of things that come up all the time in these projects. So it's not unusual for them to be late and over budget. But in this case, you know, the delays have been repeated. The opening date has been pushed back, I think, at least maybe half a dozen times or so over the years, and the costs continue to mount. So clearly, they've got some technical issues that have been much more difficult than they anticipated.
So fast forward to today, 2022, already 3 years past when the initial date was for it to be complete. Why is it now being delayed again?
Well, there's a federal monitor because most of the money for this project is federal government money. So the federal government has a monitor who oversees the project. And in his most recent report, the monitor said he was concerned about leaks. He was concerned that the signaling system wasn't finished, and he was concerned that they wouldn't be able to get certain equipment for the power overhead power system that they need. So the monitor had these specific concerns, and in that context said he thought it was quite unlikely that they would be able to make the current projected the September 9th launch date that they currently have out there.
What's interesting is that late last year, it appeared as though they were nearing completion in its entirety. We saw that video of Mayor London Breed taking a test ride on the subway. How close to completion was the project at that point, or was that really more of a PR stunt?
Well, the testing of these systems takes a long time. So you test and you find problems, and you test some more and you find more problems. So this is not a case where you're just kind of testing just to kind of verify that everything is working correctly. The testing is actually kind of integral to the completion of the system.
So has SFMTA commented on these new delays? Have they said when they now expect that it will be ready to open?
Yeah, well, they did not comment yesterday when we asked them, but they did finally come back today with a comment, and they said that they are still on target for a, quote, fall launch, unquote. So, you know, they didn't really say that the September 9th date was still operative, but they insisted that they were on track for the fall. Okay. So I think we're talking late fall.
Right. I hear a little skepticism in your voice. Do you think even late fall is realistic at this point?
Well, I don't know. You know, the experts that we talked to for the story, they thought December or January was more realistic. But, you know, we'll see. Yeah.
When this finally does open, who do you think it's going to benefit? Is there really still a need for this? It's been very disruptive for the past 10 plus years.
Yeah, it certainly has. And I think one of the things that raises emotions about this project is a lot of people feel that it wasn't really a necessary project. But people who live, especially in the southern and eastern part of the city, who might be commuting to work in Chinatown, it will be more convenient for them than the current bus alternative. So I think that was a primary constituency for it. But there are a lot of questions. The 30 Stockton bus connects those two areas right now. That's a notoriously crowded and slow bus line, but in fact, the studies show that it's really, the Central Subway is not much faster. So we'll see what kind of ridership it ultimately gets.
Absolutely. Jonathan Weber from the San Francisco Standard, thank you so much for joining us. And we have links to the San Francisco Standard's other original reporting on our website, abc7news.com. You can go to watch more ABC7 segments featuring the San Francisco Standard's city-focused journalism. Check that out on ABC7 Bay Area's streaming TV app and scroll down to the SF Standard shelf. All right, we thank Jonathan for joining us to talk about that, and stick with us. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. We'll be here every weekday at 3 on air and on live stream answering your questions. World News Tonight is next.